You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo, bringing you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. Today, we're very happy to be joined by New York State Senator John Brooks. Senator Brooks represents the state's 8th district, which covers portions of Long Island's South Shore in eastern Nassau and western Suffolk counties, from Roosevelt to Wyandanch. Well, Senator Brooks, in addition to being an active volunteer firefighter for more than 50 years and a veteran of the New York Army Reserve National Guard, he was elected to the New York State Senate in 2018, where he now serves as chairman of the Committee on Veterans, also Homeland Security and Military Affairs. And Senator Brooks, I can't thank you enough for carving out a little piece of time in the middle of your, what I'm sure is a hectic schedule.
Wow, it's my pleasure, Bill, and I look forward to talking to you today.
Yeah,
thank you.
You know, I was looking at like some of your background. You were a medic with the Coast. Was it the Coast Guard or
Army Reserves? Correct.
Army Reserves.
Reserve, yeah, the National Guard. I was a medic. Yeah.
Wow.
I had the good fortune. I went through my medical training, and when I got home from the active duty training, Nassau County just opened up the EMT and AMT programs for the firefighters in Nassau County. So I was in the first EMT class and the first AMT class in the county when I got out of service. So the timing was good.
Wow. That I want to read your book.
Yeah. And as Bill alluded to, you continued to serve your community when you got home and have been a part of the volunteer firefighter community, which I know you're obviously a big advocate for a good long time. I believe, was it the Seaford district where you spent the most of your time?
Well, I spent most of my time in Seaford. I was also in Medford and Lindenhurst for a short period of time. So I got to experience several different locations.
Oh, wow. Yeah, my dad was a volunteer fireman with South Farmingdale.
Okay.
And as a kid, I used to march with their band. when fire departments had their own bands, you know, I don't think they do that much anymore.
You know, I was over at South Farmingdale a while back now, but they were having an open house or something, and a call came in. And, you know, they're right on Main Street there.
Yep.
The traffic would not stop to let them out.
Really?
It was incredible. So I have a pending legislation. We can't get it to move, but to have a first responder safety zone. So in front of the firehouse, as soon as the truck pulls on the ramp, you have to stop. So
right.
Yeah, but I watched there, and they were banging on the horns and stuff, and the traffic just kept coming.
Oh, that's horrible. Well, is that another camera situation? You know?
It's a possibility. It's just hard to understand how people can be that foolish. The lights are going and stuff. They're obviously going to an emergency, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is what led in Nassau County, right? We're going to have cameras on the school buses.
Yeah. Well, a lot of areas in the state are doing that.
Yeah. You know, apparently people don't give the right of way unless they're threatened.
Well, I could tell you a story, but I won't. But you're surprised. When I was chief, I had somebody that didn't want to give me the right of way to get there. And when we got to the call, he was surprised to find out we were going to his house.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that must have been an interesting realization.
Wow.
But, Senator Brooks, we did want to start with your perspective of governing through this pandemic. Obviously, you know, now over a year into it, we're thankfully at a different place. We're in the recovery stages. We're, you know, kind of looking forward to a summer that's hopefully, you know, a little bit more easy to just do the everyday things now that the infection rate has dropped, thankfully, to pre-Thanksgiving levels. So can we just hear, again, just some of your experience? You and your staff, I'm sure, you know, had a lot of different challenges put upon you on behalf of the constituents. So if you just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I also have with the background in because of the fire service and what we did with emergency management and as a medic, in the military, you're trained on certain procedures and actions to take during a catastrophic event. I had maybe a little different background than others, but certainly, if we're honest with ourselves, the country was not prepared at all. And on a national level, we responded exceptionally slow. A great deal of denial as to what was going to happen. And one of the things, if you remember, in the state legislature, there was a discussion on the authority the governor was going to have. Well, yeah. From an emergency management standpoint and an incident command standpoint, you can only have one guy calling the shots with these things. And the governor had to be given those powers. That was the right thing to do there. We were in a situation, obviously, where we didn't have the equipment we needed nationally. We were in a situation where we were dependent on other countries to provide both equipment and eventually medical supplies, which really, we haven't truly responded to that yet, but we need to be self-sufficient on these situations. And, the fact that we didn't have the PPE, the fact that we didn't have certain pieces of medical equipment, shame on us. And I think, I don't know that we've started to do it, but I think nationally we have to do an after-incident evaluation and the various mistakes we had. We also are in a situation we recognize across our country that there is a great deal of fear on some vaccines, number one. And there are many, many people that don't understand that sometimes in a catastrophic event like that, you don't get to do what you want to do. You got to obey certain rules to protect the majority. And, we had a terrible time with that. And then we had large gatherings at different times. One, quite honestly, associated with a presidential campaign. And somehow after those visits, there were a lot of people in those areas that were suddenly sick. I hope as a nation we learned a lesson. I think for what we were able to do, particularly once the vaccines got going, I mean, there was some problems with the delivery and some concern, but once we got ramped up, we got 2 million people vaccinated in 100 days. That's amazing accomplishment. So, I think nationally and statewide too, we have to do an after-incident evaluation and make some changes. And certainly in our state, we've got to make sure that we have PPE equipment available at larger scales. And we've got to not put ourselves in a position for certain medications and other things we're depending outside our borders for equipment. So I think that's something we've got to go through.
Yes, yeah. No, those are very important points. And like I said, especially given your experience as a first responder, we do know that your office was a big part, like a lot of electeds, of giving out information. There's a lot of disinformation, of course, around this whole pandemic. And it was important to see, the webinars that you would have and other senators would have about different maybe benefits programs, like the eviction moratorium or other things like that also aren't the directly public health related concerns, but have been a ramification of this very difficult year plus now going. So we did want to segue, given, again, your tie to the volunteer, both EMS and firefighter community, which is a very big contingent on Long Island. Can you talk about, too, some of their experiences and why it's important to recognize their kind of both hardship and, again, contributions? I know that you've supported a lot of legislation around them and that issue in the past.
Yeah, I mean, so I gotta go back just to tell you a quick story. As it became clear, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and for us old guys in the firehouse, we were told don't get on the trucks for a rescue call, because at that point we saw that the seniors were more susceptible, or that was the impression. But I will tell you my immediate reaction the first time I was at the firehouse where they were going to a known COVID call, and to look at the gear those individuals had on. They were basically encapsulated in protective clothing. They went to the alarm. After the alarm at the hospital, they spent an extended period of time cleaning the truck. And when they came back, they cleaned the truck. The equipment they wore was destroyed. And the reality of what we were in was right in front of your face. I mean, they were sealed up in a cocoon, did what they had to do, and I give them all the credit in the world. Had to clean the material, then everything they wore was destroyed. So it just said, like, this is not a game. And as you may know, I believe it was in Valley Stream, they lost a guy early in the stages that treated somebody and became ill and were lost. So it wasn't a joke, number one. And if you remember the rate of growth on that and the virus in the early stages, when it was really here, it was like every 5 minutes somebody was getting sick, and it was going here and going there. And you know, you sat there and you just said, like, this is not like anything we've seen before. And you know, I quickly took the staff out of the offices, had them work from home. We had at one point we had one or two people in the office to answer the phones. We stopped them, and we still don't allow any in-office visits at this point. We may start to change that. But you really had to reshape the world that you were in, and then pay close attention. And I have friends that worked in some hospitals in the city. There were several nights we would be on the phone trying to negotiate with folks in China to get certain equipment. We'd be on the phone for literally hours, and then all of a sudden you get, okay, gone, get better price, got gone, sorry. And that was what you had. So it was really a challenge. It was growing at a rate that we really couldn't absorb or understand. You saw how the medical facilities were being overwhelmed. You have to praise those in the medical community. They worked hours. They were sharing way long beyond the effective use period. Some of the PPE. Many of them were getting sick. And it was incredible. And then the virus itself was, if you will, changing directions, and variations were coming out. So you were battling an enemy that in some ways seemed to be smarter than us.
Yeah.
And we had the competition that was going on to buy certain equipment. And it was frightening that states would negotiate and get something, and then the federal government would overbid them.
Yeah.
It was just incredible. So, like I said, we got to look back and see all of the many, many mistakes we did.
Well, do you think the overall atmosphere of politicizing the virus, I mean, that definitely changed the landscape, and how, you know, if someone came out with information, they would ask, well, who said that? Was that a Democrat or was that a Republican?
Yeah.
And you say, well, it was a doctor. Do you care what his, you know?
Well, I mean, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, some of the things said during that time frame, and some people were commenting when they shouldn't, and pretending you can put a cleaning detergent or inject sunlight or some other thing is beyond the pale. And then to deny it or to pretend that we're in control, we know what's happening. No, we weren't. And you know, the one thing we got to learn, I don't care what party you're in or what position you hold, honesty is the only thing you need to talk about there. Yeah. And to say I don't know is sometimes the right answer.
Yeah, people respect that.
Yeah.
That's important. So let's just remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully again joined by State Senator Jon Brooks, who represents the 8th District of Long Island. So, Senator Brooks, I just to close the loop on terms of the volunteer firefighters and EMS issues, I did know that I believe you were a sponsor to some pieces of legislation. Just wanted to maybe just get your quick take on, why specifically, I think it was the bill S 1963, which related to COVID-19 exposure for volunteer EMS and firefighters again, to be basically kind of covered if they were exposed to COVID-19 into some form of benefits. So if you just talk about that.
Yeah, well, what you have, and sometimes, granted, whenever we write policies and procedures, we write them with the known, understand circumstances. When you get into a situation like this virus and the limited knowledge we had about it, one of the things I think was very critical is there was a presumption that if you were on a call or exposed to the virus and later had the virus, it should be presumed that your exposure on that call is where it came from. We can't be arguing over when did you pick that stuff up. We're actually, this past week up in Albany, we introduced legislation for a fire chief, Chief Brooks was his name, James Brooks, that ruptured his aorta in a fire call, vascular system. He succumbed to the injury in the end. But we introduced legislation, at least I think we'll pass it. We passed the first piece through the committee. The presumption is that injury is associated with his firefighting duties. And one of the things I said, all across this state, whether it be paid, whether it be volunteers, you're guaranteed when you make a phone call and ask for help, somebody's coming. And firefighting is one of the most dangerous occupations in the world. And with this virus, so too EMS response. You've got to guarantee somebody's coming. Those guys who came need to have the guarantee if they get hurt or something happens to them while responding to that line, they're going to be taken care of too.
Yeah.
And in this case, the injury that the chief had, there's some lack of clarity. So we're going to end that lack and make sure that thing's covered. But we are so fortunate in this state, the thousands and thousands of volunteers that respond to these kind of emergencies, and they do it for free.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be in a situation where we have to worry about our families after the fact. And in this case, sometimes people lose their lives in these calls, and the families they're going to be.
Yeah. Well, but we have a lot of experience. We have a lot of experience, though, with the attitude toward, there's a droga bill. I think about that almost every day. I look at our Congress and I think it took a comedian to go down to Congress and knock on doors to get people to get on the bus for this bill. Yeah. And yet, it was fairly, to me, and it's just my opinion, but the dragging the feet, waiting for the people who got ill to pass away so that they wouldn't be covered by. This is horrific. It's just mind-boggling. So I understand why you would feel you would have to do something like this, and at least it came from leadership, not from a comedian, from the Comedy Central. Who, to that end, sometimes it takes us the words of a comedian to understand what's not funny and serious. And that's kind of what we got to, because you couldn't have envisioned what took place in the World Trade Center. You couldn't have imagined it. And then to recognize that you were 102-story buildings, I think they were, something like that.
Yeah.
They were pulverized. And we breathing in all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of chemicals and pollutants that were emitted in that thing. But it's you can plan for lots of things, but you can't imagine the horror some people are capable of bringing about. To see the firefighters that went into the building, and then the speed by which they collapsed. You had no chance if you were in the wrong place, and that was it. So, we when we view those events, you've got to learn from them.
Yep. Exactly.
When something else has happened, say, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to do this to make sure that doesn't happen.
Exactly. Even if you can't prevent the initial event, whether it's 9/11 or it's COVID, you certainly can on the back end do what's right by the people who put their lives literally on the line. And we hail them again with celebratory chants and all these great ceremonies. But when it comes down to it, they need that actual physical policy that really gives them the protections. Whether, again, like I said, volunteer firefighters or, different first responders from that incident. But that does segue into our other topic, which, again, is another constituency that's very key to your, kind of your own experience being military families and veterans. Mm-hmm. You obviously serving as the chairman of that committee in the Senate. Can you talk a little bit, too, about, both maybe either from the budget side or just trying to keep the programs for, I know, Department of Veteran Services and just everything there, especially during this difficult time. We've talked with a lot of other electeds about, the mental health crisis and all these other things going on that we know have really taken a toll on veterans in good times. So you talk about, again, supporting them during this crisis, too, and going forward.
I'd probably start first with praising a number of programs that we have in this state. And maybe one of the most successful is a program that is named after a veteran who lost his life, James Dwyer, who this is a program, it's a mentor program where you're talking with a fellow veteran about whatever your issues might be.
Okay.
And it's open to anyone who's in the service, regardless of their status when they were discharged, favorable, unfavorable, whatever it might be. But it recognizes that people in the service, many of them had issues, particularly mental health related, that were a direct result of the environment that they were in. Some people had problems with the drug dependency, and others, flashbacks of things that happened in the service.
PTSD.
And if we think about, we look back first, let's say, to Vietnam, which was a war embraced initially by the country and then hated by the country. And many of the veterans who returned were shunned and treated as though they were murderers. They were following the orders they were given by the commander-in-chief, who was operating a war, if you will, to the greatest extent with a blessing, and I use that word very loosely, of the Congress. We in that war did stupid things. Napalm, Agent Orange, the penalties that these men are paying now 50 plus years later is incredible. You're in a combat zone where you're not sure who your enemy is. You can look at Robin Williams' movie Good Morning Vietnam.
Yep.
Truth in that. The individual he was associated with, if you will, was his enemy, but he didn't know it. We have individuals now with the military. We're overly, in some ways, dependent on reserves systems today, be it the National Guard or the Army Reserve or whoever. And you have somebody who, on January 1st, is walking down the street, some town here in Long Island, and on April 13th or whatever, he's in some area of the world where it is a quasi combat zone, and there are roadside bombs and other things going on. How does somebody's mind switch from walking in a backstreet American area, calm town, to a combat zone?
Yeah, and then switch back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of people have had problems. The Dwyer program in particular, which is one we've continued to expand, and we expanded it again this year, is one where veterans work with veterans to hash it out, so to speak.
Great.
We've got many people that are in a situation where they're in need of mental health issues, or in the case of Agent Orange, their health has deteriorated because of that. We have facilities here. We got a facility in Stony Brook, which is just outstanding. It's both a veterans home, and it's also an area where vets can come in a daycare program and get assistance during the day. Because of the way this thing is set up, it can only take people within 50 miles of the facility, which kind of knocks out anybody from Nassau. But through the efforts of the county executive and some suggestions on some housing ideas, and I had, the county is about to enter into an expansion of veteran services here, which I think is beneficial.
Yeah.
We were on the phone last night, picking two advisors. New York State is one of the few states that don't have a veteran cemetery. We're in the process of establishing that. We passed the legislation, and last night we appointed some people to serve on that committee to do that. Many of our veterans return from active duty and not sure where to go, what to do with their life. We've got to do a better job counseling and helping those people.
Yeah. Also, obviously, like you said, when they come back and helping them transition, I know that you've been a big advocate for educational opportunities for veterans and even their families. I think you had a piece of legislation, trying to expand that to the family members. So that's important. And also, minority, woman-owned and veteran-owned business enterprises, I'm sure, are part of the strategy. So
there's also, Senator, there's a rumor going around that the Nassau University Medical Center may be now, at least part of it, try to do veteran services. Is there any truth to that?
But that's not a rumor. That's the truth. We have on that, and there's several opportunities there. But that's an opportunity. We do have some veterans programs at the hospital now, and the veterans office is centered there. We can expand that. There is some real estate there, for lack of a better word, that we can make some adjustments, make some housing available there. And there's a way that we can expand medical services. So that is very much in play.
Great.
Executive and I had a press conference a couple of weeks back to discuss that. We're in a situation, New York and New York State on veterans. Suffolk County has the largest number of veterans in the state of New York in residence. And I think Nassau County is third or fourth. So here on the island, we have a very large share of the state's veterans. People need help. And we're gonna do that. And to your point, that transitioning, we don't do a good job sometimes. And that guy knows he's got 9 months left or whatever. Nobody's talking to him about opportunities. In some cases, they elect to shut something down and just 2 days, next week you're out of the service kind of thing. There's a lot of things we do. And one of the things, because I think education is important, number one. Number two, the military occupations that you have, whatever it might be, give you an amount of knowledge on different subjects.
Yeah.
We're working on a system where, so I was a medic, for example. You can look at the medical training that I had, and that can transfer into certain credits for courses for instruction you would have taken.
Yeah, right.
If you got a guy that, say, had no college going into the service and came back out and you pick whatever his MOS, his medical occupation was, he might pick up 12, 20, whatever. just by what he's done over the 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever he was in the service, that makes his ability or her ability to achieve that degree much more attainable, number one. But it also recognizes the responsibilities and disciplines that he or she put on themselves during the period of time that they were in the service. So that's something we've been working very hard on,
That's great.
We can't hand somebody a free degree, but we got to recognize that they are building really important understandings and judgments and decision-making processes that have value. So,
of course, especially with medical workers, given the pandemic, I know that especially at the height, there was a rush to get as many even retired, medical personnel and even kind of graduate a little bit accelerated grad students in doing their intern placements, I guess, as doctors. So certainly that's great news. We do want to remind our listeners, this is 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College. You're listening to This Week's Long Island News. Here with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and still thankfully joined by Senator Jon Brooks for hopefully just a few more minutes here.
Before
we let you go, I know that my listeners and people that I've spoken to, one of the big issues they want to talk about, and it's something that you addressed, their taxes. Yeah. And we have in Nassau County, Laura Curran has told us that she hasn't raised taxes, and yet people still see these increases. And obviously, it's the school taxes. You have been addressing that. Senator Thomas, when we spoke to him, he actually kind of pointed us to you and said, "Oh no, Jon Brooks is working on something about that." So we're all interested to hear what's going on.
I think one of the tough questions in anything that service government provides is how you're going to pay for it. And I'm going to oversimplify this. For public education, there are three principal ways we fund it. One is by state aid, which is principally funded by income taxes. One is by commercial property taxes, which is a tax levy on the commercial properties within the given school district. And the other is residential property taxes. Now, if we want to talk about fairness first, the fairest way to tax is an income tax because it's based on the real money you have. Commercial property taxes are unique from community to community. We have many, many communities on Long Island and across the state that have no commercial property tax base. And so some school districts get a great deal of money because there are office complexes and factories and whatever else there might be in a community. And in some other cases, we're in a situation where we've got a situation where there's a major building or utility center that generates a great deal of taxes, and they might pay half the taxes. And then there are school districts, and here on Long Island, we are overly dependent on residential property taxes. So I live in Seaford, so I'll use Seaford just as an example. Seaford has very little commercial property tax base, to the extent that only 10% of the educational cost is paid by commercial property taxes. Seaford gets just 20% of its total funding paid by state aid based on the formulas that we have. So 70% of the cost of education is being paid by property taxes. We make an assumption, and I believe a false assumption, that the value of your house is indicative of your financial condition. So I have friends that when we were younger, they bought a house early in life. Maybe they paid $15,000 just for a number. And today, as homes have appreciated, that house might be worth $800,000 today. Where we are in our age, many of them are retired. They're on a fixed income, whatever their retirement pension is. But their house is appreciated. So you look at a house, and while he paid $15,000 for it, and it's now worth $800,000, so you say he's rich, right? But he doesn't have the income to say that, to reflect that. So you look at two people that live right next door to each other. Let's use the $800,000. One is somebody my age that bought the house years ago, and they own that house free and clear. and someone else is a new buyer. They just bought the house a year or two ago. So we got an $800,000 house, and for sake of discussion, they have a $600,000 mortgage. We tax them the same, based on a $100,000 house. And we say it's reflective. But in the case of one, they're on a fixed mortgage, and the value of the house is based on the fact that somebody keeps calling and doesn't understand that I'm doing it right now.
We appreciate that. We'll certainly,
not a problem.
They're sitting there, and then the other one has an $800,000 house, but only has $200,000 equity in that house, and they're paying whatever the mortgage payment would be.
Yep.
And then we tax them at an exceptionally high rate. And we're in a situation where we're not being realistic. So we had a situation in Seaford earlier in the year when some of the new tax levies were made, that seniors that were all on a fixed income and had just purchased houses, some of them saw a $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 property tax increase.
Yeah.
And I went down to see them, and they were upset. And one Lord saying, I'm going to lose my house. You don't pay your taxes, you lose your house. So we have to be realistic that we're not funding it right. One of the bills that I have introduced, we didn't move it, we're going to continue, puts a cap on the maximum level of taxes we can fund via residential property taxes, and that would be 50% as total school funding. That, for many districts on Long Island, would result in a 30 or more % reduction in property taxes. And we would spread that to the rest of the state. There's some ways we can raise funding. We've got gambling coming in, the sports camp, and some other things. But you shouldn't be paying more than half the cost of the education. And we've got to recognize that the assessed value has meaning twice. The market value of a house has a meaning on two occasions: the day you buy the house and the day you sell it.
You sell it, right?
Exactly.
Outside of that, it doesn't. So we've got to change. So we're going to be working hard on this legislation the remainder of the session. But I believe we do have to recognize that the value of your house doesn't mean a thing, and the value, and you got the $800,000 house with a $600,000 mortgage, you got a $200,000, and you can't. I always tell a story. If you're a senior on fixed income and your taxes go up and you can't pay it, they don't let you go into the receivers of taxes and give them the back window and say, I don't have any money, but here's the window. You don't get to do that.
No.
We got a lot of work to do there.
Well, and especially since the seniors are the one group that doesn't have any kids even in the school district.
Yeah.
No. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for that explanation. I love it. Now I can explain it to others
here.
No, of course. We certainly want to let you get back to your important government business. And we again, thank you so much for that explanation. And it makes sense now why Kevin Thomas was so much of a booster for that piece of policy. And I know other Long Islanders, we certainly encourage you to look into a Newsday story that was written about that for more information. And obviously, you can follow the senator on social media, on Facebook, on, I believe, Instagram and Twitter, which we definitely do, for all the information that his office is doing and the events that they're co-sponsoring and a part of. So thank you so much.
It's customary for us to ask, too, can we ask you back sometime? We'd love to have
that. Anytime, guys. Anytime.
We have another 10 hours of discussion to.
Okay. All right.
We look forward to hearing.
But thank you so much for your explanations. And
okay.
Take care.
Great.
Thank you very much. And the rest of the session.
Thank you much.
All right. Well, now we'd like to welcome to the show Victor Ocasio from Newsday, who you had a big story in the paper just, I guess it was just yesterday, Victor, about, the whole labor and unemployment thing. So why don't you let us know what you found?
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me, Bill. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, man. Thanks for coming.
So, yesterday I had written a story. I had the opportunity to speak with the labor commissioner for New York State, Roberta Reardon. And in essence, we were talking about unemployment fraud and the issue that the state has been dealing with pretty much since the start of the pandemic. With record numbers of people applying for unemployment as a result of the pandemic. We obviously saw certain industries, leisure and hospitality always comes to the top of mind in terms of job losses, but obviously many different industries, which led to folks filing for unemployment in mass, especially at the beginning. You might remember early last year, around March, April, people were, trying to get unemployment benefits for weeks, waiting for a couple months on end to get those first checks. In the wake of all of that, there have been increased instances of fraud. That's primarily what we were talking about. And to date, pretty much at this point, the state says they've identified over 1.1 million fraudulent claims. Now, these aren't individuals; these are just claims. So a single individual could submit.
Oh, okay.
X number, 100.
Right.
I think the commissioner even mentioned she knew of an instance of an individual who had submitted in the neighborhood of 500 or so fraudulent claims. So, again, these are mass operations of criminal enterprise in a lot of instances.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot to keep track of. And I know it keeps both law enforcement and the FTC and all these other agencies that, the AG's office that are trying to give people some form of recourse, but it's so difficult. I'm sure as your reporting shows to actually kind of fully do the detective work to find out who this is, because it could be an out of the country actor. It could be, some kind of crime syndicate using VPNs that you could never know where they are. Who knows?
I believe, Scattered Dawn, I believe, is one of the groups that they've mentioned before, which, these are, like you said, these in a lot of instances, these are as the commissioner mentioned in my piece, these are sophisticated criminals. A lot of times, these are crime rings. These are organizations, oftentimes out of the jurisdiction or outside of the U.S. So it becomes a really difficult task to sort of pin down who these people are and prosecute. Although instances are being referred to federal prosecutors when they have instances, because it is a federal crime.
Yes.
Right.
I received that notice recently that that they are still working on with their federal partners. Trying to get these EUI fraud division cases to be somewhat litigated. But like you said, I'm sure that's a Herculean task trying to sort through all the noise.
I think one of the interesting things, Victor, that you bring up is that, that's a concerted effort by, a consortium, I guess, to go after and cheat the state and the federal government out of that money. This is a bell that should go off for all the people who have spent their lives amassing some kind of retirement, that there are people out there who are professionals at separating you from your money.
That's, it's a good point to keep in mind, That's
their job, is to get you, just to get their foot in the door, get a finger in there, and everybody is vulnerable.
And like you said, it's hard to tell. Usually it isn't, like you said, somebody just, doing it on their own. It could be, but like you said, it takes a good amount of technological wherewithal to do this. I'll just,
I would think also an individual putting in 100 claims, they should be worried about getting caught because they broadcast such a wide,
and this is, and to sort of put it into context, so, sort of talk about what we've seen change, at least from the commissioner's standpoint. Prior to COVID, prior to the pandemic, when we talk about fraudulent claims at the state level, she didn't provide, the commissioner didn't provide a hard number, but said that the number comparatively was, nowhere near. She said in some cases it might have been in the double digits in some cases. And a lot of that fraud at the time, prior to COVID, would have been a common instance would have been someone who is employed, but they are also collecting unemployment. That's fraud. You can't be employed and collect unemployment.
It's like double dipping.
Yes, you can't double dip. There are instances, something called partial unemployment. That's different. That's a different case, and the state is completely aware and on board for that.
Yeah, they changed that policy early in the year too.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. And but this is, that was the most common, double dipping. Now what we're talking about here is literally, cyber criminals who have obtained people's personal information, say through the Experian. It was one of the great examples, the Experian data leak,
big hack.
Data breaches we've had with Sony, other major organizations. People get this information. Sometimes the information is old. Maybe it's an old address. Maybe it's your maiden name, whatever the case may be. But then they use this information to get their foot in the door to try to wedge their way in. And, the smarter the criminals will have the smarter criminals don't want you to ever know that your identity has been stolen. That's the trick.
Exactly.
But the state has implemented new tools like ID.me, and these are a little harder to get around, but they aren't stopping there. They're now getting on the phone and calling the Department of Labor or sending pleading emails saying, my family, we need help. I can't get through the system. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
They are trying any and every means to try to get this money. And to date, the state says they claim that they have prevented $12.3 billion from going in the hands of fraudsters. Now, how they make those calculations are yet to be known. And I did ask how much money has gone in the hands of fraudsters. Was not given an exact number, was told it is significantly less than any of the money that they prevented going out the door. So
okay, that's good to hear, because I know there were stories about places like Colorado where I think the headlines were that there was more money being given out in fraudulent claims at one point than legitimate claims. And when you hear something like that, that's certainly catches your eyes and your ears.
Victor, don't you think that's it is kind of a weird way to deliver you that information, isn't it? We stopped X. So it's not.
Well, I mean, and I understand your point. True. And for sure, one of the questions that I do want to have answered, and I'm going to be pursuing on, is okay. Well, how much is it? Is it $100,000 that went out? Was it $50,000? Was it? I have no idea how much went out. But to put it in context, though, in fairness, over the past year, in terms of benefits, just to give you scale of the problem. In terms of unemployment, rather, we've given out, the state has distributed over $81.3 billion in benefits to over 4.6 million New Yorkers. So that gives you a sense of scale of how detrimental the pandemic has been on people's livelihoods.
Exactly.
Put that in comparison, that past year is equivalent to nearly 30 years of benefits under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
So that's how detrimental this past year has really been in terms of people's, economic viability, their ability to get by.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I did want to bring up, and let's remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Long Island News on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully joined by Victor Ocasio, Newsday's labor reporter. And, Victor, another thing that I did want to touch base with you, because it's happened since our last conversation, for most claimants, if they're still actively claiming, they hit what was known as the benefit year end, being after a year. We've talked about the additional extensions of eligibility that wouldn't have been there, if there wasn't a pandemic.
Used to be 26 weeks, right? That was
and they expanded it with the additional, the different EB and other, kind of acronym programs that only are for the wonks, for those who are still trying to navigate themselves firsthand. But that said, I do work in constituent services. I can't speak about, the specifics, but I did see, and I've heard from other people, in similar positions, that there had been a large uptick in folks having these issues trying to recertify or to revalidate their claims into the new benefit year end. Have you been seeing that as well, or because?
So that's a great question. And so, yes, I have heard, instances of individuals who, they may have run out the clock on one program and thus should then transition over to another extension program, and that there have been instances in which there is some sort of clerical issue preventing the jump from that, or they may have to recertify or reapply. Yeah. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And I have heard of some issues there. I haven't heard too terribly much from readers who've reached out, but I have certainly heard of that problem. I've actually spoken to a couple of readers and try to forward along their information to DLO spokespeople. One instance that I have heard, to bring it back to the fraud, though, which is kind of an interesting wrinkle in all this, is say, for example, you are a victim of unemployment fraud. Let's say last year, you got a letter from the Department of Labor saying, "Hey, Bill, hey, John, you applied for benefits. We're going to try to get those benefits to you as quickly as possible." You look around and say, wait a minute, I have a job. How is this happening? You then report it to the state, which you should definitely do. And in my story, the state encourages you, please report fraud. If you get
we'll share out the link for that. You could do it. It's a very easy online process. Definitely recommend that anyone who's gotten those notices.
Definitely do it. The issue does come up, though, however, and I have heard this, that people, even after reported fraud, they may be employed, and then a few months later they lose their job. I've heard this. I actually got a story from
point.
And then they go to apply.
That's what we're seeing too.
And their account gets flagged because the last time that name came through the system, it was a fraudulent claim. And that creates delays and a back and forth. And that is definitely an issue. And the labor commissioner is aware of it, which is why tools like ID.me are more useful, because they allow for more precise verification of identity. But I mean, if you're a person and you were a victim of identity fraud, you report it, then you lose your job. It's so frustrating. I've spoken to several readers who've had this exact issue, and it's in most cases, from what I understand, they end up getting their funds, but we're talking significant delay. Exactly.
And it adds the insult to injury. Bad enough, like you said, that if this is something that's happening, you have to be worried about your own kind of personal financial information. But now you also have to worry about that you're not going to get your benefits because somebody committed a crime in your name, unfortunately. And I'll just say quickly, and I think I might have alluded to in the past, that just personally, even though I work in this space, my family member, my mother hasn't worked for 40 years, got one of those claim notices. We again obviously did the right thing, and we know how to navigate it, but still, weeks after, we got 12 notices, almost in a matter of 2-3 days, of thankfully DOL denying people who were trying to set up direct deposit fraudulently, in her name for a claim, again, that wasn't hers. So, and then we wound up just getting a notice from Geico a couple of days ago saying, "Oh, well, we're sorry, but apparently your data was compromised, for the DMV, and that's what may lead to a fraudulent UI claim in your name." So it kind of came full circle. So just to empathize with our listeners and with the readers of Newsday, like the folks you talk to, certainly, it's a really frustrating situation, but it's much worse if you have a claim that you're relying on to feed you and your family, of course, and keep the lights on. So, like I said, let's be all doom and gloom, I guess, but go ahead, Victor.
But one of the things I did want to say, though, just so it's important, so I think your readers know, we had a story. Obviously, our story has a list of various tips. I recommend people check that out just to see what resources there are. Again, there's no silver bullet for all these issues. And if you are a victim of identity theft, which leads to unemployment fraud, definitely report it. But some other things to know in terms of how the system works. Once you report an instance of fraud, you will receive an email confirmation of that report. Now, from what I'm told, the state then is supposed to put a freeze on that account to prevent funds from going out. And though you still may continue to get pieces of mail from the Department of Labor, even after you reported it, because they have certain mechanisms that, then we've got to send this letter each time. It creates a paper trail that the state needs. So after you report it, I'm told, don't expect a phone call necessarily saying, "Okay, we've got your fraud report, blah, 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 blah." But, just be aware that you will get an email confirmation. You should get an email confirmation after reporting your fraud. The mail may continue, but, that is just part of their processes. It's not an indication of payouts.
Of course. But it's tough to, like you said, I'm sure explain to, claimants and constituents, going through it. But like you said, that is a good point to definitely emphasize. And, Victor, just with the little bit of time we have remaining here, again, let's remind our listeners listening to this week's Long Island News here with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and Victor Ocasio, Newsday's labor reporter, again on the Voice of Nassau Community College. Just wanted to highlight some of the other events that you've been a part of, I believe with your colleague who we've had on before, Faith Jesse, recently, yes. For trying to help folks who are now hopefully, trying to get, on the other side of, the claimant equation, which is to get back into the workforce.
Yeah.
And you guys had, I believe, an event maybe last week about job hunting tips, and then another one, I think, about resume writing, maybe even yesterday. So could you tell listeners about, kind of just some general takeaways and important things to know maybe from those?
Yeah, of course. And we recently wrapped up a 4-webinar series about job hunting in the post-pandemic world. We had experts from Indeed and LinkedIn come on, and this is part of sort of Newsday's live, offerings. And we're hoping to do much more educational things like this in the future on different subject matters, of course. And a lot of the things that we talked, we heard about is, first off, it is tough. It is tough out there. There's a lot of people applying for various jobs, especially on sites like Indeed, and competition can sometimes feel very disheartening. I would, for sure, for a lot of people. But like in terms of certain things to keep in mind, I mean, it may be time to look at your resume. If you haven't done an update to your resume in a few years, definitely look at that. If you're submitting resumes online, certain things to maybe avoid, don't put any graphics in there. I know when I applied for my jobs, I wanted something to be splashy and nice, but when you're submitting an application online, algorithms can act in a certain way.
Yeah.
And it may do you more harm than good. But other things to do when you're writing your resume that I've learned is keywords. Make sure that when you're putting in, like if you're applying for an engineering job, maybe it's an electrical engineering job, think about all the different words associated with that profession and that career and try to get those in and work them into your application, because a lot of systems use algorithms to look through. And if you don't have those keywords, even if you're like the best electrical engineer ever,
right,
may not pop up in the algorithm. So
exactly.
Take some time. If it's been a few years, the world is a little bit different in terms of how applications look. There's not somebody sitting there going through each one.
A 5-page CV,
Think search engine optimization when you're applying. That's probably
God.
That's SEOs. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, that's probably
nowadays.
One of the biggest takeaways I got, at least.
Okay. That is certainly definitely an important thing. And I think maybe some of those might be recorded, so we certainly urge
yes, they are. Yes, please
to go back and look at those. I know. Cool. As always, I urge everyone to support Newsday and to subscribe. And obviously, you can find out information too through Victor's social media presence. I know we always like to plug your Twitter, where I follow you at Victor_Ocasio. And are you active on any other platforms, Victor, where people can follow? I know it's tough sometimes,
I feel like oftentimes I'm like the Luddite millennial, because I don't. I go on Twitter mostly to find headlines, other news, and find out what people are talking about. But I definitely Twitter's primarily where I'm at the most. And but you know what? I think you're motivating me, John. I need to get out there. Got to be more social.
You got to catch up with Faith Jesse. She's got the Instagram.
No, Faith is wonderful, by the way, to work with. I met her for the first time during the pandemic here, and she's just an amazing talent that Newsday's lucky to have.
Definitely. We appreciated our conversation with her in the past and all your colleagues, and certainly we look forward to having you back another time and this conversation and
definitely talk to you soon.
Yep, most definitely, Victor. So you take care, have a great week, and be well. Thanks.
All right, take care, John. Take care, Bill.
Thanks, Victor. Take care.
All righty, Bill.
Wow. Well, we got some good info. We almost brought it in under the wire. The clock on the wall says it's time. So we thank you. We'll see you next time right here, same time, same place on 90.3 WHPC.